Hello, and welcome to Underneath the Hat podcast. I am your host, author, entrepreneur, educator, Cherie Simmons, and welcome to season 4 of Underneath the Hat. Speak over yourself. If you have not done so already, make sure you like and subscribe the podcast on YouTube and Underneath the Hat podcast. You can also check us out on Anchor, Overcast, Spotify, Apple, Google Breaker, and Pocket Cast. Also, don't forget to share, post questions and comments. You can even sew into the session using our Cash App, YLAAT 2017, or through Zelle at underneaththehat@gmail.com. So, it is officially the month of March, which means that the podcast is coming to an end. On March 18th will be our final episode of the Underneath the Hat podcast. I cannot believe it has been 4 years that I have been doing this. And for those that have been with me for the entire ride, thank you, thank you, thank you. For those that have joined throughout, I appreciate you as well. And so what I decided to do leading up to this finale of Underneath the Hat podcast, since December, when the Lord let me know it was time to clear my plate and try something new. I've been taking each week and focusing on a song that resonates with me, and all of them have been some of my favorite songs, and then I just speak about them. So I spoke about the song Intentional and Pieces of Me by Lettucey, Necessary by Fantasia, I Love the Lord, Live Your Life, Change Me by Tamala Mann, Hell No from the Color Purple Broadway soundtrack, Safe in His Arms by the Thompson Community Choir, and Got Her Own by Jamie Foxx and Neo. So for these last 3 episodes, I have decided to go back in time and do a reflection of each of the seasons that have led me to here. So I chose one of the episodes that spoke the most about that season, and then just to review the progress that I have made since then and how I've grown since the filming of that episode. So I wanted to start with how it all began in season 1. And so what I'm going to show you first is actually the opening of how Underneath the Hat podcast all started. And I was real fancy. I had people in my life at the time that were very good at videography and putting things together. And so my podcast started off very, very fancy and top notch. And so I'm going to go ahead and share that with you now so that you can see how it all began. So here is the opening of Underneath the Hat, season 1. So that was the opening of my podcast when I first started. And the opening starts out with different episodes or pictures of different episodes that I filmed. And the reading that you heard was from my book, Underneath the Hat, which is where this all started from, the book that I wrote, which you can find on Amazon along with my other book. It's That Size for a Reason, My Journey Through Infertility, which I'm going to speak about in a minute. And so just type in my name, Cherie Simmons, on Amazon, and both of the books will come right up. So this is the start of the podcast. I originally started as a radio show, and then it went for a couple of months, and then I decided that's a lot of money. It cost a lot to be on that radio platform, and so I decided to. I had heard about podcasts and was doing my research and figuring it out, and then I decided to dive in and see about doing it. And so I've heard about StreamYard, and here we are today. But that was the opening to how the podcast started. And so now I'm going to show you one of the episodes that stems from my second book. It's That Size for a Reason. And I'm going to show the clip so you can get to know more about. All right. So that episode was one of the ones that I did in my first season where I shared about my journey with infertility, which is what my book is about. It's That Size for a Reason, where I share the things that I went through. So if you looked on the table, and all these, that episode is available on Underneath the Hat podcast on YouTube. If you look on the table, I had the medication that I had to take. And as the episode continued, I actually go through the steps that I took in order to give myself shots and concoct the medicine. And so I just gave you a step-by-step process of what I actually went through in order to go through IVF, in order to have a child. And my guest was one of my former coworkers, Denise Qualls Stewart, and she had the same story as me, but she has been blessed enough to have a set of twin girls, and oh my God, they're like, I want to say 9 or 10 now, if not older. And so she agreed to come onto the show and share her testimony about what she had went through about around IVF and being a success story. So I chose that episode to reflect on because of the fact that it shows the things that I went through to get to where I am today. Even though this podcast started because of the first book that I wrote, Underneath the Hat, talking about my first my first marriage and the things that I went through and the lessons and the blessings that I learned, I didn't really figure out who I was as a person until I went through that infertility struggle. And I mentioned in my book, Is That Size for a Reason, that I had to come to the realization that having a child was not in my cards. And the title all of my titles and both of my books have double meanings. The way the Lord speaks to me, it's like in riddles. And so underneath the head not only speaks about the uniform of a first lady, which is the character Amanda Jane's role in the book or in her life, but it also speaks about the many hats that we wear and the different things that we do and how we treat ourselves underneath, which is why I end each show with remembering to take care of yourself underneath the hat. Because regardless of the hats that we wear, we're all human. We all have feelings and emotions, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves because we are important and we need to love ourselves first. And so, with Is That Size for a Reason, the Lord showed me that title in a dream. And the double meaning behind it is that when I spoke about in the clip that you saw, is that my uterus was double the size it was supposed to be. But yet I could not carry or I could not conceive a child. So even though the space in which the children would be housed was big enough to hold them, it wasn't meant for it to happen. And so we all have dreams and goals and things that we want to do, and we don't understand why things are set up the way that they are. But I've learned and realized that it's that size for a reason. It's happening for a reason. And even though I was not built biologically to give birth, I have given birth to many things spiritually. With my 2 books, with this podcast, with my mentoring program, Young Ladies at All Times, with the other opportunities that I've had, all of those things were birthed inside of me. They were gifts that God gave me. I never would have thought to be an author. But God saw fit for me to be able to tell my story and to give me a platform like this podcast to be able to share so that other women didn't have to suffer in silence like I had been doing for so long. I never would have started my own business, or been a mentor to someone else. But God saw fit for me to go through the things that I went through in order to be an example to these over 100 girls in these last 7 years that I have helped and worked with my mentoring program, Young Ladies at All Times. So even though I physically, biologically didn't birth a baby, there have been things that have been my babies that I birthed and brought to fruition. And so I had to realize that not everyone is meant to give birth biologically, and not everyone can spiritually give birth. It takes a special person to be able to do the things that I have done and to understand why I went through the things that I went through and the trials and tribulations that I did and be able to learn from them. So I want to encourage those of you out there today that just because it doesn't look like how you wanted it to does not mean that you did not do everything that you were supposed to do. Your house might not look like somebody else's, but it's that size for a reason. You have what you have because it was meant for you. It was made in the image in order for it to be sustainable for you. You may not have the amount of children that you want or any children at all, but the things that you've been able to birth, the ideas that you come up with, that you've worked hard at and making sure that they happen, those are your babies. You may not be at the place that you want in your life at this very moment, but you are where you need to be in this moment. And so I just want everyone out there to just breathe, relax, relate, release, as Debbie Allen used to say on A Different World, and just live in that moment. Live in that space. Do a self-reflection of how far you've come and the things that you've done. I didn't realize how much I had done until I had to write it down. So get you a piece of paper and write down everything that you've accomplished, all the things you've been able to do. And just focus on those things that you have done, not the things that you haven't. Because I realized that I have been able to help more girls in my mentoring program that I birthed spiritually than I would have ever been able to have biologically. Because my uterus may not have been the right size, but my heart and my spirit and my mind was the right size in order to give birth and do the things that God had put inside of me to carry out the mission of Young Ladies at All Times. So it may not look like how you want it, but it's that size for a reason. It's happening the way it is for a reason. And trust me, you won't understand it when it first happens. You'll ask why, because Lord knows I did. But when God starts revealing to you why, it all makes sense. And I am so glad for those fibroids that you saw on that screen and that clip that I showed. Those were the real fibroids that were removed from my body during one of my myomectomies. And I've had 4 of them. So imagine those sizes coming out 4 times, being extracted from my body 4 times. So to be able to live through that and still be able to birth 2 books and a podcast that's been around for 4 years and a mentoring program that's been around for 6, that has helped other people. This podcast has helped others. My mentoring program is continuing to help others. And even if I'm not doing weekly updated episodes, these episodes that I've done will be around for years and will help somebody. So even if I didn't get the notoriety that I was expecting or that people thought that I should have with this podcast at this moment, who's to say that this episode or those previous episodes won't help someone a year from now who's going through infertility and needs to hear from people who have gone through it and been successful or not, but to help her realize that she's not alone. So get that piece of paper, write down all the things that you've accomplished, and just sit back and realize that you were here and chosen to fulfill these things. And even though every aspect of your life doesn't look like how you want it, it's that way for a reason. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in to Underneath the Hat podcast and being with me for 4 years. Only 2 more episodes left before we say farewell to this podcast. Make sure you subscribe and like on YouTube, the Underneath the Hat podcast. Also check us out on all podcast platforms: Anchor, Overcast, Spotify, Apple, Google, Breaker, and Pocket Cast. Also, don't forget to share. You can post questions and I'll answer them. You can also sew into the session. And don't forget to get my books, Underneath the Hat, and it's that size for a reason. Just type in Sharice Simmons in Amazon and they'll pop right up. Again, thank you. I cannot say thank you enough, and I'm going to be saying thank you a whole lot more as we begin to wind down this Underneath the Hat podcast. But until then, remember to take care of yourself underneath the hat. I appreciate you. See you next week.